So this is City Defender Guyner, a game that I made for the 2014 Indie GameMaker contest put on by RPG Maker and Humble Bundle. It's a 2D maze game inspired by an old game called Battle City, and I of course used GameMaker Studio to create it, and I made it using a lot of the mechanics that I've covered in my tutorial videos. So basically, the player is a giant robot that must defend the city from waves of invading enemies. And most levels have a set number of enemies that spawn, but a few levels have infinite spawning. In those levels, there are special towers that must be destroyed first throughout the city, and then the enemies need to be cleared before you can win. There are also a couple levels where a special city hall building must be defended as you clear out the enemies, and if it gets destroyed, you lose. An important mechanic of the game is that all the buildings can be destroyed, and they each have an associated cost. Killing enemies will earn you points, but each building destroyed will subtract from that as the cost of collateral damage. So it adds the challenge that you can clear the level of enemies, but if too many buildings blow up, you can still lose. And it also adds the incentive to kill enemies quickly so that the city doesn't get overwhelmed. Later enemies are especially destructive, with the UFO being the worst since it is constantly spraying bullets in 4 directions while it moves quickly. And the player also has to be careful not to constantly shoot a stream of bullets all over the place in case they overshoot or miss and blow something up. On the other hand, strategically destroying buildings can open up shortcuts between roads that you'd otherwise have to spend time running around to. So it just comes down to how much risk the player wants to take. There are also a few power-ups to make things slightly easier, but I tried to keep things simple yet challenging. And in the end, I think maybe some levels are a little too easy. But overall, there should be at least half an hour of gameplay in it. Now, unfortunately, there are a couple bugs that I wasn't able to completely remove. For some reason, when a certain number of enemies are on screen, they begin to ignore their collision detection, and it usually works fine when there are different types of enemies. Like if I had 7 different enemies, they would all behave normally, but if I have a bunch of the same enemy, they might start to phase through each other. And I'm not really sure why that occurs, because the collision event is supposed to make them turn around when they touch, and it doesn't always happen, only when the screen seems to get crowded with enemies. Another serious bug is that sometimes a level cannot be completed, and I believe this is caused when an enemy spawns and is somehow pushed outside the room, or pushed outside the walls around the room. And I sort of have an idea why that happens, and I think it's related to the first bug, but it wasn't something I was able to fix before the contest deadline. And it's hit or miss too, so sometimes things go just fine, and other times the level can't be completed and you just basically need to try it again. It's definitely the biggest flaw in the game and something that needs to be ironed out. Another thing I wanted to get done was setting up the level select screen so that each level unlocked when the previous one was completed. I talked about something like that in the Sokoban tutorials that I've done, and it's demonstrated in the official tutorials, but I didn't give myself time to learn how to implement it. And I also wanted the option to go full screen and adapt screen resolution, but the way I made it, for some reason the HUD would not draw properly, and it ended up moving all over the place in full screen mode. Again, with more time, I'm sure I could have figured it out properly, but I was more focused on getting the game complete before the deadline. I'm thinking of posting the game to the GameMaker site, so I can still make those changes before doing that. But I did learn a couple things along the way though, like a simple way to pause the game and create volume controls that pop up on screen. They're fairly straightforward, and something I'd like to incorporate into future tutorials. But anyway, if you'd like to play the game yourself, I will provide a link to it in the description, and until July 7th is the player voting phase of the contest, so please try it out and give it a like if you enjoy it, or leave a comment on the page. It's also an opportunity to try out a bunch of free games, over 500 apparently, so definitely check it out. And with that, thanks for watching, and expect more tutorials in the near future.